What would you do if you had constant back pain that was making it hard for you to do the things that you loved? And then all of a sudden, you ended up with hip pain that was making it hard for you to just sit down and do your job. Today, I'm interviewing Peter, an attorney who spent decades at his desk before back and hip pain really started to ruin his life. He was no longer able to play tennis. He was no longer able to go skiing. He was no longer able to enjoy just basic activities like walking around the block. Peter was told that based on the severity of the damage in his hips and spine, he needed to just wait until things got so bad that he would need to have his hip replaced or hip resurfaced. He didn't like those options, and that's how I met Peter. And over the past few years, Peter has made gradual but fantastic gains in his function, range of motion, and has made great decreases in his own pain levels. We're really fortunate to have Peter sit down and share his insights and the things he's learned over the course of the last few years. And I hope that if you've got hip pain or back pain, you'll find this interview really helpful. That is inspirational, dude. Peter, welcome, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. I'm so excited to get through all of this. So can you tell us about how your hip pain journey all started, the history, the diagnoses, the treatments that you were offered?
Sure. So, Matt, I'm in my 50s now, as you know. I started to have hip pain that was noticeable probably in my early 30s. I was very active during my free time, which I didn't have much of, but I was active in a variety of sports, running, tennis, and doing them at a pretty high level, but not really doing much else. So I started to have what I thought was just sort of, ordinary muscle pain from, being mostly sedentary with an office job or desk job, and then going out and, playing a 2-hour tennis match or going for a 3-mile or 5-mile run with hills. So I just sort of wrote it off, and I didn't do anything else in my body other than, the actual exercise, running, tennis, or, something, sort of cardio type exercise. And I always consider myself to be pretty fit, and I probably was in a cardiovascular way, but the pain started to worsen as I got into my early 40s. But it was actually my back that sort of threw me for a loop first, because I'd always had, back issues. And now looking back on it, I see the two are probably related, because the body, as I've learned from you, works, sort of as a whole system. It's hard to look at things in isolation. But it was my back that sort of laid me up with some herniations. And I sort of shut things down. And as I shut things down, I became even weaker and less mobile as I was dealing with the back issues. So, I had the pain, to answer your question, I had the pain probably, for almost 5 to 7 years, 10 years, and then it got progressively worse.
You had the back pain and you had those back pain diagnoses, and then you're saying then the hip pain started up as well. And then, so can you talk about the hip pain and the back pain? When were you noticing it? Was it just sitting at your desk, or was it hiking, or when did you really feel it?
It was it didn't take much for me to be uncomfortable in my back. Could have been sitting, standing for extended periods of time. I really wasn't doing much in the way of activity other than sort of just daily things, showering, dressing, cooking, things like that. And the hip pain was more prevalent sitting. So sitting was uncomfortable, like going to a restaurant and sitting was uncomfortable. Sitting in a car was uncomfortable. So it was, unfortunately, it was persistent. That wasn't sort of so intense that I, couldn't tolerate it, but it was, it was bothersome.
So then you had both these things going on for several years, and then you said mid-40s. Is that when you went to the doctor to try to get some answers? Yeah.
Yeah, I started to see orthopedists, back specialists for my back. I had imaging, herniated disc diagnoses, back degenerative changes in my back, just a litany of things, sort of called pathology for my back, lower back. And then I saw my family doctor about my hips, and then I went to see a specialist about my hips, and I had more imaging for my hips. And various diagnoses, including FAI, cam impingement, labral tears, arthritis, degenerative changes. I mean, just sort of a laundry list
Yeah.
uh, of uh, of things. Well, I could sort of put them all into sort of the bucket of, well, degenerative changes, and that's where, and then of course there was a discussion with the various doctors about options, injections, you know do steroid injections, which I did do for my hip twice, and both hips didn't no I saw no noticeable change from doing that. And I knew it was sort of a band-aid option, but I didn't really know what else there was for me. I tried PT at the same time. I found some of it to be helpful, but it wasn't something that I really could uh, engage in with any continuity. I just didn't feel like there was a sort of a long-term strategy or plan,
Mm.
and that I was, being given exercises that would have been given to anyone else who has sort of these same labels. But I'm not anyone else. I mean, I think one thing I learned with this journey is that everybody's body is different. And, what mine needed, I don't think that PT was giving me. Um, so, I was frustrated and not sure what to do at that time before I found you, actually.
You had this very long list of basically every possible orthopedic diagnosis for your hip pain. And so they presented injections. Did they present surgery as an option to you?
I was told that I was too old for any type of arthroscopic procedure, and that my degenerative changes were too far along, that that it wouldn't help me to have any type of, FAI or labral type of repair procedure. And I felt like that was, I, I'm glad that the provider I was seeing was honest with me in that respect, not, sort of pushing me in that direction. But I was told that I was a candidate for replacement surgery or resurfacing surgery, but maybe
Got it.
young, and then it might be better to just wait some period of time until the pain gets too bad. That sort of, I was sort of given the impression that it's only going to get worse, and then eventually I'll need, intervention. And then between now and then, I could, steroid injections, for example, would be a solution, or to take it easy, or, wear soft shoes, just do things to sort of baby my hips and my body.
So to make sure it's super clear, it's your hips are really bad right now. They're so bad that we don't want to do arthroscopy because that's not invasive enough to help. In order to help you, you can just wait till things get so bad, and then we can either replace the entire hip joint, or you replace the top of the femur, or get in there and start shaving bits to smooth it out.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Cap the bone and sort of, partial type of replacement, which hip resurfacing is. So I
Okay.
knew of those options. I'd done my diligence. I'm a pretty thorough person uh, by training, by personality, and I felt like was well armed with a lot of facts and information. But I felt, I felt sort of dejected, really, because not only was I not doing things that I love to do and that are part of just who I am and I wanted to do with myself, family, with friends, but I was given sort of a prognosis of, it's only going to get worse until you do this. And you don't have many other options. You have to try PT, but no one really gave me any sort of reason to be optimistic that PT was going to, give me significant improvement.
Right. And your own experience with conventional PT just wasn't that inspiring. It wasn't giving you that much relief or anything.
And I don't want to sort of attribute that solely to the professionals I was working with, but also to sort of, I think, the model for my lifestyle at the time didn't really allow me to embrace PT in a way that it became an integral part of my life. It was really seen, and I think for many people, as I have family members and others do PT, it was more sort of like an add-on or adjunct to something that you do, like going to, a yoga class for a half hour, an hour a day, and then that's, going to be all that you need and you'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
My reality has been that, it's been more than an hour that I needed every day. I just felt like it wasn't enough, and it might be enough for some people depending on what their condition is, but for me, it just wasn't, because I was I had shut things down for such a long, for a year or two after the injuries and problems. And I was sitting a lot of my day. My body was getting weaker and less mobile. It wasn't getting stronger and more mobile. And I just didn't know what I didn't know to try to
Yeah,
address that.
that was such a huge discussion that you and I would have all the time, right? And we'll definitely come to that. But just foreshadowing, what Peter is touching on is, really looking at how your entire life works and what the human body needs to feel good. Before we get to that, you mentioned, you're at this low point, you're feeling dejected, you don't really have hope. How did you end up stumbling on my videos and just finding me? What was that
The way
process?
that most people find information these days, went onto the internet. And I started looking for, HIP, FAI, hip improvement, hip training. I mean, I just typed in a few keywords that related to what I was dealing with. And I almost immediately found some of your content, some of your videos, educational content, and also your FAI fix program. And I watched your videos. I listened to them carefully. I read your materials. I looked at the various medical journal articles that you provide through your site, and I just, I wanted to. I sensed that I was missing information. I didn't have information that could be helpful to me, and that there
Mm.
might be another way to improve my circumstances, improve my condition without, going down the path of surgery, or more shots or painkillers, things like that. So that's how I found you, and became more informed, I think.
So, what about what you read or encountered there resonated with you, and why did you even have this belief that there was some other option?
What resonated with me was that I realized how little I knew about my hips and hip function, and
Mm.
what my hips are capable of doing, sort of in a, sort of a natural form, sort of, I'll call it out of the box, like from when we're born to, to where we are in our lives now. I just had forgotten or never really appreciated, because it just sort of happened for me when I was younger. Like, I didn't think about it.
Right.
I could do a sport, I could run, I could wrestle, I'd do whatever, and it was sort of on demand, and it was there. I didn't have any problems. But I lost that somehow. Never really knew what it was, because it just happened for me. So I lost it, and I needed to learn about what it was that I lost. So
Mm.
that, like, to do a deep squat in good form, to internally and externally rotate my hips, to do a frog stretch, to do, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, to be able to move it in all these different ranges of motion. Because for so long, my range of motion had been, sitting in a modern chair, and walking. And I mean, I was just sort of limited in my ranges. So what resonated with me was that, that I learned, I just sort of opened my eyes to hip function, and also that people with, these different types of diagnoses that I was given, that you demonstrated there are people who have those diagnoses, yet they still have excellent hip function and maybe little or no pain. So there wasn't sort of this, you push back against sort of conventional thinking or wisdom that if you have these diagnoses that you automatically, have pain, have dysfunction, and that's as a result of those things. So it convinced me that there was a way to deal with the dysfunction I was having and the pain that I was having through, a non-invasive approach.
I want to touch on sort of that process of having lost all that function in your life. Before we started the call, you had mentioned, academic career and now your professional career really limited the number of movement options in your life. Can you speak a little, just briefly, about your professional training, your professional life, and what that looks like now?
So, like most people, I sat in school when I was in grade school and high school. I went to college. I sat in college a lot. I was still active in my college years, but less active because I was sitting a lot. I entered the professional world, working world, while I was in college. In my late teens, in my early 20s, I already had a full-time office job. I was in front of computers on a regular basis. So I was just sitting a lot. I was sitting in the car. I was sitting in commutes. I was sitting in meetings. I was sitting at my office desk. I was sitting at lunches. I was sitting at dinners, sitting. And then I would still do I was still active, but it was only in these intense short windows of activity, like a run or a tennis match or something else. And I wasn't doing any mobility training or weight training or anything else for my body. So I just had two sort of very, just sort of the vast majority, and then of course I was sleeping. So such a limited period of time was being given to healthy, whole body, functional movement. And I was, as I was aging, I was becoming weaker too, I think, because the muscles weren't being used in a way that they were being challenged. And then of course, as you know, I have a family, so more time was being spent with a young family and children.
Right.
You have your own young child. So I had less and less time to spend on my own, body needs and maintenance.
Yeah. So for anybody watching, Peter is an attorney, and I just want to touch on one thing I've noticed with people I've worked with is people who go to law school. That period of law school, they get wrecked, physically wrecked, because they're sitting for like 18 or 20 hours in front of I don't know if it's a book anymore. It's probably in front of a screen now, but in the past, you studying and writing down case law, whatever you're doing, and your body just falls apart in your early or mid 20s when you're doing that. And then you get into your career, which is more of that, it seems like, right?
I think it's a gradual sort of decline, but for me, I didn't realize it until it sort of like the stick snapped, almost sort of like literally with my back. So for others, maybe it's more noticeable sort of gradually, but in my case, it was sort of, I saw this, looking back on it, I could see the signs, but I didn't see the signs when it was occurring. And maybe I didn't want to see the signs, because I was busy. It was, you make, it's maybe human nature to sort of turn a little bit of a blind eye to some of those things. Or if you've never sensed them before, we don't know how to read those signals, so we just sort of ignore them.
Exactly. Thank you for touching on that, because that's such a common thread. I know for me, and for plenty of people I've worked with, that's the same story. Is like, now that I'm getting these things back, when I look back, I realized when I was losing them and what I was doing to lose them. But at the time, I ignored it, didn't have an explanation, or the only explanation available was, well, you're getting older, so that kind of just happens, right? Like that discomfort, it's just a natural part of aging, and you don't think about, your own agency in that process, your own choices that are affecting that process. But like as you have discovered, as you kind of pull the veil up, you start to see, wow, there are a lot of things that I need to be doing, right? So let's talk about some of that. So to be clear, your process of getting to where you are today hasn't been linear, right? Like the discussions you and I had, we had a lot of discussions about your own fears, doubts about what your body could do, doubts about, your future with your body. Can you speak about that process and where you struggled, the roadblocks you ran into, and how you kind of really just had it all click for yourself?
I'll start with the topic of pain. Pain is a motivator, and it can also be something that sort of makes people question what they're doing or not doing. So that was always a consideration. We sort of gauge progress, maybe it's human nature, based on sort of pain levels. And looking back on it, maybe that wasn't the right way to think about it. Because even though I was still having pain, I think I was making progress with becoming stronger and more mobile, and regaining some of the sort of lost function that I had, and even becoming more active. So that's one thing I think about, and even to this day, because I'm not, my experience isn't pain-free every day. I'm considerably more comfortable and significantly more active, but I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect hip or perfect hips. And so I'm sort of realistic about that, and sort of thinking that I'm going to be, 100% pain-free forever. I don't think that's realistic for me, given my journey. But we can come back to that, talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit. I think the
Yeah.
other hurdle was time, sort of figuring out how to integrate this into my life in a way that it would, I would give myself the best chance, because I had limited amount of time. So I had to be, I think, um, innovative in how I would approach it. Could I, integrate it into my life in a way that I just wasn't doing in a half hour in the morning and a half hour at night, right?
Hmm.
Could I do it while I was sitting on the train? Could I do it while I was sitting in a car? Could I do it while I was walking to a meeting? Could I take a 5 minute break and, you know, and read a document and do an exercise at the same time? So I had to get the most out of my time to optimize this. Not only the most out of my time, but looking back on it, and even to this day, the more I integrated it into my daily experience, I think the more beneficial it became. That I couldn't
Right.
just do it as sort of like something I do in isolation, like um, like cutting the grass, and then it's done. It's sort of, I needed to change my paradigm on this and make it more a part of who I am and what I expect out of any given day. So once I was able to make that shift, I think I started to see more progress. And that may not work for everyone, because some people may not be willing to sort of make that shift and change their paradigm. And I still struggle with that a little bit, but I think I've changed my lifestyle in a way to be able to and for the better. Everybody wants quick results, right? Sort of like you want
Right.
to eliminate the pain and go back to doing whatever activity right away. And that didn't happen for me. And that was hard. Um, it's taken years, and I'm still seeing improvement. I was able to do things just this past 3 6 months that I couldn't do 1 year, 2 years, 3 4 5 years ago. And in fact, some stuff that I couldn't do since I was um, in my high school. And I don't expect to become sort of a high school version of myself again, but it's just said to me that it takes time. It's not linear. It takes time. And that but the upside, I think, is potentially unlimited. I mean,
Right. Right.
depending on how smart you are, how you approach it, what you want to do, hopefully stay injury free, and really sort of matching that with your goals.
So you've touched on some massive paradigm shifts for yourself. So one of the big ones that you've mentioned now is sort of like how you relate to pain, or what your expectations are around pain. So you've said when you first started, your whole mindset was around like, well, can I get to a point where I just don't experience pain at all? Which I think a lot of people with pain, that's the first motivator. Like, I just, no more pain, please, right? But then you mentioned like, well, that kind of got you didn't get you feeling right physically or mentally, and then you shifted into this functional focus, which you've now also mentioned as like, wow, like look at my function changing over this last 5 years, and I'm more comfortable. So can you speak a little bit about how your focus has changed, and how that relates to the reduction in pain over time?
So being active is really important to me, as you know. I lost those activities when I was in pain and hurt and felt like I couldn't do these things. So that is in some ways almost more of a priority for me than being sort of, pain free.
Mhm.
So as I trained myself to become more functional, there was also a correlating reduction in pain as I was doing those activities. For example, in 2017, I hadn't skied since like 2012, 2013. I went out one day, my daughter was in college. I went skiing, downhill skiing, and my hips were so uncomfortable. I did, I don't know, 6 or 7 runs, pretty easy downhill skiing. And I was just sort of, um, I was dejected after doing that, because it took it was less enjoyable because of the discomfort I was having. I was able to
Right.
do it, but it was discomfort. I was in discomfort. This year, fast forward, I skied more than I have, probably than I can remember actually. Um, and I still had some discomfort as I did it each time, but it was much less than the discomfort I had a few years ago. And I was skiing at a much higher level uh,
Nice.
for longer periods of time. And I didn't have the pain didn't get increasingly worse the more I did it or the longer I did it. It was it was just sort of this, it was low level, and it was the joy and benefits I got out of the skiing far outweighed whatever, minor discomfort or symptoms I had at that
And the
time. I realized sort of I had this, my function went up here and my pain went down to here. Pain's not completely gone, but the function has improved dramatically.
So I want to highlight something here too, because there's often this, there can be this misconception that when we talk about things like this, focusing on the function, that we're also saying you should just ignore the pain and just sort of like play through the pain, right? Which is not at all what we're talking about, right? Like if your function is going up and your pain is going up, that's not really a great situation. And I mean, I actually don't even see that very often, right? But like that's kind of an outlier situation. But a lot of people get in this mindset of like, well, if I play tennis and it hurts, maybe I just need to play more tennis. And maybe if I just keep forcing it, it'll feel better. When the reality is, for your skiing as an example, you had to do things that would improve overall function and prepare your body better for skiing. So then your function for skiing has gone up and the discomfort went down. You did the homework, you did the fundamental work you had to do in order to actually enjoy your sport, right? You're not just gritting through pain, right?
Specific example, when I skied years ago, it just hurt to sort of carry the weight of the boot and the ski on my leg. Just sitting
Yeah.
in the chair lift, it just hurt. This year, because I've been doing exercises with ankle weights,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I didn't even notice it. And I wasn't uncomfortable from that because my hips were much stronger, my legs were much stronger, my ankles are much stronger, and I felt like I could just manage that weight more efficiently and safely and more comfortably in different ranges of motion, because now I understand and appreciate internal rotation and external rotation while I'm wearing a ski boot, or flexion and extension. I mean, I just trained all those muscles to be able to handle that load in a way that I hadn't before.
Oh man, I just love hearing your story of progress over the years. So I guess one thing I want to touch on here is earlier you had mentioned the numerous studies out there that show no correlation between medical imaging with your hips, your knees, your spine, and actual symptoms and pain, right? But the conventional medical model is all about, you have this damage that we can see, that's what's causing your problems. In your specific case, you were told like, wow, it's so bad we can't do arthroscopy on you. It's terrible. We need to resurface or replace. How do you now view the health of your hips, and what does resurfacing and replacement look like to you now that you're seeing your function improve so much?
I'm not sure. I mean, if I measure health based on function and pain levels, I would say the health is much improved. Not perfect, but that I feel good about it because I can do the things that I want to do in my life, and I'm much, much more comfortable. So from that standpoint, I would say markedly, dramatically better. I think with regard to imaging, it's a data point. It gives each of us some data. Then it's a question of what inferences do we draw from that data? Mm-hmm. Specialists draw certain inferences, non-specialists draw certain inferences. If I focus solely on what the picture looks like, I would be missing, I think, what is a big piece that I've become attuned to from working with you and working with others who recommended that I maybe look to in terms of content and material. But the muscles and the tendons and ligaments are critical to the functioning of a joint. That's within my control. The fact that I might have a torn labrum or a herniated bulging disc or degenerative changes in my lower back. I mean, take my back, for example. I mean, I can lift and move things today that in a safe, functional way that I couldn't do before when I didn't have back pain. And I'm not concerned about hurting my back. It gets a little stiff once in a while, like any middle-aged man's back might, but I can pick up 30, 40, 50 pound bag of dog food. I can throw a 40-pound bag of mulch over my head. I mean, I can move stuff and not be fearful. And I'm getting it stronger. My view is I'm only gonna get it stronger and more mobile. So not that I'm gonna try to throw weights around that I shouldn't, because there's that fine line. I don't want to get hurt, but
Right,
I
right.
can do things that I couldn't do before. And if you took an image of my back today, you'd probably still see a lot of what was there, you know, a few years ago when I had it imaged. I mean, I probably have degenerative changes there because I've sat a lot. I've been very active. I've fallen out of trees when I was a kid. I've done all the things that, people do that, I've been unfortunately in car accidents, things like that. You sort of like accumulative stuff that your body encounters, but I feel like I've been able to offset that and negate it by focusing on the things that I can control.
Yeah, I think to summarize it in another way is like you, sure, the images say these are damaged, et cetera, but you're still clearly able to improve your function regardless of what those images say. So while it's a data point, it's clearly, definitely in your case, it's clearly not providing you any clear idea of your maximum potentials or the direction you should take.
Agreed. And if you image any other part of my body, any other joint, you'd probably find other degenerative changes just because of what I've done in my life. It could be my wrist, my thumb. You knew my left shoulder bothered me for a while because I had been doing some rock climbing, and I probably hurt it in some way. But I have great shoulder function now with no discomfort. But I train my shoulders regularly. I do dead hangs, I do presses, I do rows. I mean, I do all the things that that I've learned through, your content.
Oh man, it's so every time you tell me what you're doing now, it literally gives me goosebumps because I'm just so happy you have made this journey. And I wanted to touch on this because it's fun for me too. You told me you recently started surfing last year. What
Yeah.
has that been like as a man in his 50s deciding I'm gonna go play in the ocean?
Well, it was about 6 years ago that I actually had the first opportunity, where a good friend of mine, he's the person who actually taught me how to surf. He asked me to come out and if I was interested in getting on a surfboard. And at the time, this is shortly after I hurt my back, my hips were bothering me. I remember going out into the water and sitting on the board, and I couldn't even straddle the board comfortably. My hips hurt trying to straddle. It's like I can't do this. Not enjoyable. I didn't feel like I had the strength to get out through the surf. I really didn't do any surfing that day. And I didn't touch a surfboard from that day until last year. I started to do stand-up paddle boarding about 2 years ago, which has been extremely beneficial for me, strength-wise, mobility, balance. I mean, just being out in nature, all those things. But regular, surfing on ocean waves wasn't something I had considered until last year. But my same friend, he said, you want to give it a try again? I said, yeah, I think I'm ready to give it a try again. And I felt I was comfortable straddling the board. I could climb up and get up on the board easily without really any problem. I could paddle out through the waves. My shoulders were feeling strong and good. And I've been doing a lot of swimming, so that had actually trained me to be able to paddle out into the ocean. And getting up on the board, at least to my knees first, and then popping up, my hips could handle it because I've been doing the squats. Been doing the squats in different I've been doing lateral squats, forward and back. I mean, I just felt strong enough to be able to do all of it and to do it for pretty much as long as I wanted to until I got tired eventually after an hour or so of like getting hit by waves and things like that.
Right.
And I also felt like I wasn't going to get hurt if I got pummeled by a wave, because I just felt like I had, I could sort of do a controlled fall. So I've had, some surfing is like skiing. You can get hurt. I've had, nicks and cuts and bruises, things like that. But I'm okay with that. That's sort of the price of admission for doing that activity.
And I mean, your body is able to bounce back from it, right? Like if you had been doing that, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, if it's hard to straddle the board, getting pummeled is going to be much worse. So, and you said you're surfing now pretty long sessions, right? You're doing like a couple hours.
I can do for an hour and a half at a time, hour and a half at a time, and then take a break and then do another hour session.
Nice.
Sometimes there are more waves, less waves, so sort of less. The amount of energy expended varies based on sort of what the conditions are. But I can go back-to-back days. I really don't go a day without doing some type of strength training, mobility training, and some other type of activity to go with it. It might be a swim, it might be a hike, stand-up paddleboard or surfing. So I try to combine the training with some type of activity that requires me to put all that to, into use. Um,
So how much time would you say in a given day, you've integrated much more movement into your life, where before you're just sitting, working, commuting, sitting, sleeping. What does a typical day look like? How much time are you spending with the fun stuff? What are you in the
well,
movements?
the training stuff is so integrated. I'm not sure how I could even measure it because I can set aside, for example, maybe an hour to do some sort of like really focused hip work. Like this morning, I put on ankle weights. I do 8 pound ankle. It's actually close to 10 pounds now. I do an 8 pound ankle weight and 1.5 pound ankle weight on each ankle, and I go through different exercises I actually learned with your Upright Health program, Upright Live, yeah, that you had a year or so ago with Trevor doing a lot of instruction. But I put together about 7 different exercises, and I do 3 sets of 10, and that takes me close to an hour. But that's my whole sort of internal rotation, external rotation, abduction type exercise that I try to do two days a week. But then I integrate a lot of other things into my day. For example, if I'm in the kitchen doing something at dinner, making a meal, I'll take the opportunity while something's simmering in the stove or cooking to get in a few more squats, some quad stretches, some hamstring stretches. So it's sort of becomes so interspersed in a way, and I don't even really have to think about it. It's just sort of like, oh, I have a few minutes here, I'm going to do this, or I could be waiting for my car to get fixed, or I'm in the dentist's office, or I don't know, Matt. I really can't answer the question because it could be an hour. I guess if I added up all those little individual components, maybe it's collectively more, but I'm much less sedentary than I was before. Even if I'm watching something on TV at night, I'm probably down on the floor doing a 90-90, and just sitting more comfortably, varying my sitting conditions to give some stimulus to my hips that I can't get if I'm sitting on the couch. Before I go to bed, I might do some cat-cow stretches for my back, maybe some basic yoga poses, just to limber things up. I take a few minutes every day to do a dead hang. One of the most beneficial things I think I've done for my back and my spine to get better alignment is to do a dead hang. I know you and Trevor are proponents of doing that. Trevor used that in the Upright Live, and I do it probably 2 or 3 minutes every day, broken down into 1-minute segments. I have a pull-up bar. I can find just about anywhere that I've made makeshift places to sort of figure out how to do a dead hang. And my back just feels so much better. I just feel so much better when I do it. It's just like what my body needs, and it helps. So
it's good to have that practical perspective. My life looks very similar, right? If I'm at the park with my son and he's playing on the playground, I'm probably doing squats or split squats or stretching. One of the funniest things I've noticed is, when I take my own son to the beach, even when he was like a little baby and could barely walk and crawl, if we're at the beach, I would kind of work on doing splits, just like set my feet really wide apart and just stand there in the sand and keep gradually spreading out. And, I've done that since he was a baby. Now he's three and a half. And when we're just sort of like hanging out in sand at the beach or at a park, I've noticed him doing the same thing where he'll it's just a casual split, and, he can go farther than I can quite easily. But I just think it's so funny to see like, oh, he's doing splits now too. Great.
It becomes just part of your, for me, it's just become part of my life experience. I mean, for example, the beach, when I go to the beach, and I was never really one to sit in a chair for hours and hours, but I did sit on the beach for a long period of time. Now, when I go to the beach, I'm doing things. I'm moving around. I'm sitting, like this on the floor, like I am. I'll do a 90-90 sit. I might do some squats. I might do some, leg raises. I might do some single leg, deadlifts with no weight. I mean, I mix it up. How much time?
On your pop-up, do some pop-ups.
So I just keep myself mobile. instead of staying fixed in any one position for too long of a period of time.
Right. So you had mentioned in your email to me, you had mentioned that you still go on some websites and like kind of online, I guess, online support groups for people with hip pain. You shared a pretty, I mean, tragic story really, but can you kind of talk about, what you've seen and kind of your perspective on the stories you now have read about hip pain and hip surgeries?
Yeah, I think my story, other people have their stories, but I've read stories from other people, considerably younger than me, some older, who, it sort of starts the same way. They have pain, they have hip pain, they have back pain. They go to see a specialist, usually, their family doctor or orthopedic specialist. I mean, that's what most people would do because they're concerned about, the pain. That is there an injury? Is there some damage or some harm? And my experience was that there was never really any much attention given to my muscle function or my range of motion. Most of the focus was given to, sort of what did my bones and joint look like, right? Did I fit what, diagnoses would I match up with? No strength tests, nothing along those lines. And I can see that other people have took a similar path to what I was taking. Maybe some of them tried PT, maybe some of them didn't, but they were given similar options, steroid injections, and arthroscopic surgery if they have a diagnosis that involves FAI, CAM or pincher impingement, to sort of fix what some see as being bone abnormalities that's identified as a source of pain. I seem to come across more stories where people who have that procedure have continuing problems than people who have the procedure and have some sort of rebirth with their hips. Now, I'm sure there are stories, and I've read some, where people do have improvement after having an arthroscopic procedure, but any invasive procedure carries with it significant risk. So I rarely see in any of those stories that anyone has considered that there may be a way to improve function and reduce pain without going straight to an invasive procedure. And I don't mean to say that suggest that these procedures don't help people. There are people who have improvement after they have these procedures, but I just think that for me, and I would think others would want to consider something that would push that off to the future for a long period of time and potentially forever, if they could try something else. And for me, trying what I tried, I had nothing to lose. There wasn't some huge financial commitment that I had to pay, tens of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis or an annual basis. It was more about opening my eyes to another way of improving function and reducing pain. And in the process, really sort of, I think, empowering myself to take greater control over my own well-being. It was in my means to be able to do that. I wasn't so sure about it at the time, as I had doubts, but the more I did it, as I saw results, the more I realized that it was within my means, my ability to make improvement without doing something invasive. And maybe I will have to one day. It's just that right now, and maybe forever, I know it makes you laugh, because I want to be a realist. I'm in a much better place, and I've made tremendous improvements, and I'll continue to do it, and I'll take it as far as it allows me to go.
The story that you shared via email, I think, was like a young woman who was like 30 something in her 30s.
Yeah, someone in their 30s who had been given diagnoses similar to what I had been given: hip pain, different, joint issues, and recommended arthroscopic procedure because they were considerably younger. They had it, and they ended up being worse. Right. And they're, now you're sort of set up for, well, where do you go from there? Do a hip replacement or hip resurfacing?
I've seen similar stories. I think one of the most heart-wrenching ones I ever read was somebody commented on YouTube, and she said, I've already I've had, I think it was 5 or 7. I think it was 5 hip surgeries. I'm only 21 years old. You know, I had my first one, I think she said at 15 or 17. But anyway, from teenage years to early 20s, had already had multiple hip surgeries to try to fix FAI, hip impingement. And my hip still doesn't feel good. I still need to get more surgeries to fix this, was her conclusion. And so I saw this and I felt, you know, really bad, right? And actually kind of angry on her behalf. So I've seen this kind of like age group that the surgery is being used on has expanded down and down and down. You're a father. You know, you kind of have the perspective of a father who kind of sees you have a longer life. You've seen youth. You know what goes on in people's minds. If you were talking to somebody who has one of these diagnoses, has hip pain, is, you know, under 50 or under 40 or just a younger person, what kind of advice would you give to them if they're sitting in this situation?
Yeah, I would say do your homework, do the self tests to prove to yourself whether your hips are functioning well or not. And if they're not functioning well based on the tests, for example, the tests that you have in the FAI fix.
I think a lot of people, once they have the diagnosis, when they do something like self-test, any exercise they do, and they find that they're not able to do it well, they attribute that to the bone problem.
The diagnosis.
So,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And don't jump to that conclusion. Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I think it's dangerous to jump to that conclusion and say, well, I can't do that. I can't lift my knee. I can't lift my leg. I can't externally rotate. So it must be because I have arthritis. That it must be because I have cam impingement. Stop for a moment and say to yourself, or it could be because I've never trained my muscle to be able to move my hip in that motion, that I don't know how to connect. I have no motor control over that muscle. And even though I did have motor control, the muscle is too weak and tight to be able to do what I want to do. That's just as plausible, I think, an explanation, maybe more plausible an explanation for the immobility than, or they could be a combination of the two. I mean, but don't rule out that your muscles are not a factor. They're a huge factor. Bones don't move in a vacuum. I mean, you need muscles to move bones.
I mean, frankly, yeah, the bones don't move, period. Right? So they don't move unless something acts on them. Right?
It took me a while to accept that for myself, that that's the limitations and discomfort that I was experiencing could be for there could be some other cause than what I was being told I have on imaging. And even if I didn't have a definite answer, there's no downside to me getting myself to be more mobile and stronger. It was just honestly, for me, it was a no-brainer to explore that and to do it and to go, but I think you have to go all in. It can't be sort of like, I'm going to try this and I'll do a half hour here and there. It took, like I used the phrase earlier, it took a paradigm shift for me. But I would say, do your homework, educate yourself, learn about your anatomy, learn how your body should function, learn about what might be preventing your body from functioning in the way that it should. For example, prolonged excessive sitting or even prolonged excessive standing. Any one position for too long a period of time is going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Body wasn't meant to be in a cast. Find a plan, follow a plan. I mean, you have a plan. I followed your plan. I still follow it to this day. Bits and pieces of it. I'm sort of further along than when I was before. So
you have a bit of your own plan, right?
I continue to draw on it and use it. Yeah, absolutely. And I go back to some things I did before when I feel like maybe I need to go back and do more frog stretches, things like that I haven't been doing as much.
So one thing related to this, I think I want to wrap probably with this topic. Once you've made that paradigm shift, for people who are willing to say, okay, I think I'm willing to go all in. I'm willing to say, I'm going to change this. I'm going to work on all the things I can change. I'm going to change my lifestyle. I'm going to start doing different exercises to improve my range of motion, build flexibility and strength. What is the experience like when you've been sedentary for so long and you start doing these new motions? What was the actual internal feelings and what were your emotional responses to those sensations? And how did those change over time? Because people
I think
experience a lot of fear and stuff involved in this process. So I'd like you to speak to that.
there are physical feelings, of course, because you're putting your body into things that you doing things with it that you haven't been doing. There's discomfort. So there's that element of it. It's not what's good for your body. Those movements right away might not sort of correlate with, well, now I feel a lot better physically, right? So that takes time. It took time for me. I remember doing sessions with you, and I would end the session, and I wasn't sure if I felt better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back on it, I was making progress. It was just sort of laying, it was in the early stages. I think emotionally, it feels good to be much more mobile and stronger. I mean, it feels darn good physically and emotionally. I mean, I can't put a price on it. I can't put a price on being able to, go swim for an hour and feel good, or go surf for an hour and not be fearful that I'm going to get hurt, or go skiing. I mean, I just can't. It's priceless, really. So it that I'm really grateful to be able to do again. I don't take it for granted, but it took making this shift, and that the shift wasn't easy, But I feel like I made it to sort of into this new model, and I can now sustain it. And I like learning. I like training my body. I realize now my body needs it, like almost like sort of like eating.
It's
Um,
just like food. That's right. Yep.
and if you take us back to sort of our pre-civilized forms, our bodies to function needed movement and benefited from movement and strength. The guy who could run, jump, and climb was able to escape, a vicious, carnivore. It was so our bodies, needed that just as much as they needed to, to eat and sleep.
Yeah, there's a biomechanist, Katie Bowman, who has written some excellent books. And she talks about movement as being nutritious, right? You need to get nutritious movement every day. And I think that analogy is so spot on, because when we're hungry, when we have an empty stomach for long periods, the stomach hurts and starts to talk to us and say, hey.
Yeah.
And in the same way, muscles, right? You don't move enough, muscles start to hurt.
Yeah, it's a self-preservation signal that you need to do this. You need to move to make these feel better. Atrophy gets painful. Dysfunction gets painful when your muscle imbalances. You get.
So before we close, is there anything else you'd like to add? You have the opportunity to tell anybody who's got hip pain or back pain, is there one thing that you would say to help them in their journey?
I think the potential there's such a great potential for the human body, and it's such a marvelous piece of, the capabilities are phenomenal. And I think we forget that, or at least I think I forgot it, took it for granted. And living in a modern world sort of, put me in a position where I started to lose the ability to do certain things. And I think you really have to, for me, I had to become more thoughtful about it and mindful about it to recover it. So it's not easy, I think, in a world that's, that's more technological, and we see more and more things that are sort of efficient and require us to do less. I think we can embrace technology and do all those things, but we have to then be thoughtful, or at least I have to be thoughtful about sort of what my my physical needs are, my body needs, um, even while we have all these other things, this laptop that I'm looking at and that you're looking at. So I don't think they're incompatible. I just think it takes more effort, it has on my part to keep my body, running.
Gotta bring the attention and the mindfulness to it to treat the body well. All right, well, Peter, this has been super helpful. Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit and chat about all of this. Peter has been gracious enough to say that he would answer some questions if people want to reach out to him.
Yeah.
We'll set up something probably in some links that go along with this, so he doesn't get flooded and bombarded.
Happy to do that. I feel like I've benefited from the stories of other people you've interviewed, your own stories, Matt. Stories of others who've trained with you and what they had to overcome. So if I can help one person with this and my experience, it becomes all the more meaningful to me. I feel that that's the least I could do, is to share my story in a way that maybe others can benefit.
That's huge. Thank you so much, Peter. And
Matt,
yeah,
thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be, a part of your journey.
If I hadn't found you, things might be different for me.
Hey, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for listening to this interview and listening to what Peter has to say. If you know somebody else struggling with hip pain or back pain, or you're in a support group where people talk about these things, please feel free to share this video with them. It could be a huge help in shifting people's mindsets and helping them get on the path out of chronic pain. If you liked this content, please click a like button, subscribe, and as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks.
Life shouldn't.